when we ask for wisdom, would you give us the courage to do whatever it is you're going to give us the wisdom to do? We want to be careful that when we're asking for wisdom or we're stuck, it's not because we're actually afraid to hear what God really wants to say, or we can hear it and we just shut it down. The other day I was talking to a young man, and we were talking about his life and his journey, and he had been a believer since he was young. And he had come to this certain point in his life currently where he felt like there were things he was asking the Lord or seeking out the Lord for, and it was just zero response from God. And as a result of that, he was quite frustrated and felt like, God wasn't answering his prayer. God wasn't speaking to him. And his question was like, why? How does that happen? Why does that happen? And that's a question we get all the time. I mean, it's a common question. It's a question in Scripture where people are, following the Lord, or they're trying to do what's right, and then they run into these situations where it doesn't make any sense to them what's happening, and they feel like God's either not present or it's not clear, and they're lost and don't know what to do. So it's a question that we need to ask because the Scripture actually does address it these times. And I think, so there's a couple ways we can think about this because we've all experienced it in our lives.
And I think we think the people in Scripture are like superhuman, or I don't know. I've experienced it.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. There's times when I feel like, as the Scripture says, your prayers are just going up and hitting a brass ceiling and falling to the ground. They're not going anywhere. Nothing's happening. So I thought, let's talk about that because it's important to resolve it. So there's different ways we can talk about it. One way I think that's really important, and I'll share, and then you can weigh in on how you understand it as well. But so one thing is I think is interesting is things that we think about God, or ways that we think about God and how God should respond to us or could respond to us. That's really just our own way of how we would respond to something. So that's a big challenge. And I don't think we think about that so much. So the idea of idolatry is that we've made God just into us, or he's like me. I'm not like him. He's like me. He thinks like me. He responds like me. He has the same views of things as I do. And so when I ask him a question, I'm really just asking myself for affirmation of something I may already believe, or I want an answer that I think would be the right answer. So we're kind of coming in the wrong posture.
Can I add to that?
Yeah.
I don't want to interrupt your train of thought, but that's really important because we have to be careful not to confuse our own emotional desires with the voice of God.
Right.
And that's what you're describing.
Exactly.
And I think when I'm trying to help people and they feel like they heard God and they acted on it and it turned out really negatively, it's because they confused their own emotional desires with the voice of God.
Which is one issue we want to talk about. How do you protect against how do I protect against my own desires and emotion influencing what I perceive to be the voice of God? That's one thing. However, there's these times when it's just blank, right? Like it just seems like there's nothing.
But I think what you're saying about the idolatry is, I think God's voice is my voice.
Yes.
Is that what you're saying?
Right. So it does seem like there's no real answer, or you're stuck. So a couple of places in Scripture I just want to talk about is, so one that always jumps out to me, I think as you're reading in Scripture, there's really no example of a person or people who are genuinely pursuing God. Like you're really just trying to do what the Lord wants you to do. And in that pursuit, you either are completely deceived or nothing happens. There's no example of that. So we want to be careful not to create examples that don't exist in Scripture. That's part of believing a lie, is that somehow we can be pursuing God and we're just going to miss it. And that'll help us get back on track, as you'll see here. So Numbers 13 to me is a great example. So you have Israel following God, led by Moses. heading to the promised land. They're beginning to understand their identity as they're not slaves. They're a royal priesthood. They're going to be a light on a hill for all nations. They're beginning to, that God is providing for them. They're beginning to grasp this national identity from Moses, who has been through the identity process with God for his time in the wilderness and brought back into right relationship with God and himself. And so they're getting all the way to the land. This story, the 12 spies are sent in. They come out and they talk about this is Numbers 13:27 says, then they told Moses, we came to the land to which you sent us in. Surely it flows with milk and honey. There it is. It's beautiful. This is its fruits. But the people who dwell there are strong. They live in fortified cities. They describe the people, and it's producing fear. Like, it's producing fear. Like, okay, yeah, it's a great land. It's a beautiful place. We know we've been invited by God to go this direction, but now we're in this place where we're potentially going to get stuck. And they do get stuck really for the rest of their lives in this one place. The question is, why did they stop hearing from God? Had God misled them? Had they been misled by their own desires? But this is what it says. It says, verse 30, but Caleb quieted the people before Moses and said, let us go up at once and possess it, for we are well able to conquer it. So what Caleb is doing is he's saying, look, God's already talked to us about this. Now we're here. Let's follow through with what God has invited us into and in his leading us in his voice. So let's just do it. We don't have to think about it again. We don't have to second guess it. We don't have to get introspective on it. Let's follow what we know the Lord has said to us. Caleb says that, but his fellow scouts said, we are not able to go up against these people, for they are stronger than we are. So they brought the Israelites an evil report of the land which they had scouted, saying, the land through which we went to spy is a land that devours its inhabitants. And all the people that we saw in it are men of great stature. And they're the sons of the Nephilim and the sons of Anak, who come from the giants. And we are, in our own sight, grasshoppers. And so we are in their sight. So what you do see in Scripture is not people who try to follow God and they got lost and God wasn't clear, which would make it really God's fault. What we do see a lot in Scripture is people who have stopped. They've stopped following God. They've stopped listening to God because of their wrong view of themselves or their wrong view of God. And so in this situation, they're like, we're not going in. We're not going to go into the land because we're grasshoppers. Our identity, although God said it was this, is actually this, grasshoppers. And so now the only way that we can even approach God is as grasshoppers, but the false can't approach God. God can't speak to an invented identity that we've come up with because it's not there. It's not true. And so one of the very first things when you're praying or when you're beseeching God on some issue or asking for guidance or asking for wisdom, he's first going to come back to who you really are. Like, you have to keep coming back to that. As I approach God on whatever it is I'm asking God about or seeking wisdom on, am I approaching him in the truth of who he says that I am? That's hugely different, because Joshua and Caleb are looking at the same facts and the same potential future as the 10, but they see it completely differently. Look, it's ready. We can take it. The other group's like, they're giants. We're too small. No, it's our land. God gave it to us. They're asking God, should we go? Definitely. These guys aren't really asking God, and so they're stuck. They're stuck and they're alone. And their prayer might be, which is my second point, their prayer, if they were actually praying to God, would be, God, why don't you just clear everything out and make it so I can just walk in there? Like, why aren't you doing that? Why aren't you responding to me? Why aren't you answering to me? When that's not God's design, it's not his plan, and you're only praying that prayer out of self-protection and self-promotion. Again, it's back to search me, O Lord, and know me, as David prays, and reveal to me any way that's offensive in you, and then lead me in the way everlasting. So another kind of way to think about that is when we're asking God questions or praying about things, we have to allow God to be God in how he responds. So again, this is where I might be asking God, what about this? Or how do I take care of the situation with a predetermined answer in my mind? The answer might terrify me so that I'm not really asking. So James says, when you ask for wisdom, don't bounce around. Don't ask for wisdom and then decide once God gives it whether you're going to do it or not. It's like God doesn't play that game. If you come to him and ask him for something, in as much as you can, you need to be like, and whatever you say, we're going to do it. It's gonna be a challenge, but that's the attitude of our heart. Or is it when we ask for wisdom, would you give us the courage to do whatever it is you're going to give us the wisdom to do? Because we know from reading scripture, it's going to require your presence for it to happen. It's not just going to be something I'm like, oh, great, that's exactly how I want it to happen. And I can already do that in my own strength. Like, that's not going to happen. It's going to be the Lord inviting you into something that's really impossible without him. So we want to be careful that when we're asking for wisdom or we're stuck, it's not because we're actually afraid to hear what God really wants to say, or we can hear it and we just shut it down. So when the disciples ask Jesus a question about like money, it's really interesting how he answers. Jesus is how God talks to us. The way Jesus talks to people is how God talks to people. Don't forget that. And it's unusual for Jesus just to go, yes, no, or this is exactly how it's going to work out. He rarely, if ever, says to the disciples, here's the plan for the next 5 years. We're going to do this, this, and it. He just doesn't do that. His thing to them is always just follow me, and I will make you to be calm. And so your communication with the Lord is just this daily, we can make our plans, but God's the one that orders our days. It's this daily walk with him in the mystery of how he's guiding and leading. And he is going to take us in places that we're afraid to go. He does it to the disciples all the time. Basically, whatever they're afraid of, he's walking them into because he wants to take away their fear. And so if the disciples are afraid of storms at sea, which they are afraid of, or they're afraid of pigs or demons or demon-possessed people or Samaritans or Pharisees, Jesus is always walking them into them. And so if they're praying, Lord, what do you have for us today? Like, well, I'm going to take you through a hurricane, to a graveyard, where pigs are, where there's a crazy guy. They may not want to hear that, and they may shut that down, going, those things are all unclean, that can't be right. And then their prayer life in a way becomes like, we're not going there. Like, Lord, send me wherever you want me to go, but I'm not going to Yemen. And then the Lord's like, okay, then you're not really asking me. You're not really seeking my guidance. And so then it becomes to us, well, he's not really answering me. So watching Jesus respond to the questions of the disciples or the lives of the disciples, it's huge. It's prayer. It's them in a conversational relationship with God. And so when they ask him about money, he talks about birds. When they ask him about clothes, he talks about flowers. When they ask him about the kingdom, he talks about fields and pearls and being like a little child. It's like, so God doesn't, the way God leads us is through symbol and picture and story, because that's how your intuitive mind works. So if you're looking for A, B, C, D, this is the way, guaranteed success. Like, it's really actually not in the scriptures that's a relationship with a living God. So reading the word, understanding the word, and then how God communicates with all these amazing people in scripture, who are the ones that follow him, who hears him, who moves with him. Look at the things that they have to walk through in terms of their own fear, we don't even get what you're talking about, Lord, until we take the next step. If we're not committed to that kind of relationship, it's gonna seem quite silent to us, and very much we're gonna get stuck, because he's saying, look, that river, that sea will part, but you gotta go down into it first. that's like, okay, I'm not going to do that. Lord, talk to me about something else. And then it just goes silent on us. So I think that those are a couple of things to keep in mind.